Morgan Harrington was never the type to ignore a mystery, and Callum Drexler knew that all too well. From the moment she started asking questions, her fate had been sealed. Silas Griever had built an empire on secrets, and Joran Albright had witnessed what happened to those who got too close. But Morgan wasn't just anyone. She was relentless, fearless, and dangerously close to uncovering the truth. The night she vanished, it wasn't just a crime. It was a message. And the red ribbon tied around her wrists was a warning that no one else would dare to ignore. Morgan Harrington was last seen on a rainy Friday evening, stepping out of her apartment building in the heart of Westwood City. She was a 27-year-old investigative journalist, known for her relentless pursuit of truth and uncovering corruption in places where few dared to look. That night, she wore a dark trench coat, shielding herself from the steady drizzle, an umbrella tucked under her arm. Her steps were brisk, purposeful, as if she was heading somewhere important. But after that night, she was never seen alive again. Her closest friend, Leora Vexley, grew worried the next morning when Morgan failed to respond to her messages. They had planned to meet for coffee, a routine they never missed. But as the hours passed with no response, Leora's concern turned into alarm. She called repeatedly, but each ring led to voicemail. The eerie silence unsettled her, pushing her to check Morgan's apartment. When she arrived, the door was locked, the mailbox untouched, and there was no sign that Morgan had returned home the previous night. Morgan's landlord, Callum Drexler, was the last known person to have seen her. He recalled watching her leave the building around 8 p.m., but nothing had seemed out of the ordinary. The lobby security camera captured her exiting the front doors, her phone in hand, checking a message before slipping it into her coat pocket. That was the last definitive image of her. Investigators were soon called in. They traced her usual routes and reviewed nearby surveillance footage. One camera from a traffic light caught her walking alone near an intersection a few blocks away. She was on the sidewalk, her umbrella open, waiting for the light to change. Then, as the street darkened for just a moment due to a flickering lamppost, she disappeared from view. When the light stabilized, she was gone. It was as if she had stepped into the night itself, vanishing without a trace. Her family and friends were desperate for answers. Flyers were printed and plastered all over the city, bearing Morgan's face with bold letters reading, "Missing." News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting her disappearance as an urgent case. People speculated about what might have happened. Some suggested she had been kidnapped. Others believed she had run away, though those who knew her best dismissed that theory immediately. Morgan was not someone who would leave without a word, especially when she had an unfinished story she had been working on for weeks. The first breakthrough came when her car was discovered 2 days later. It was parked in an abandoned lot on the outskirts of town, a place known for illegal activity and discarded belongings. The doors were locked, but the driver's seat had been adjusted for someone taller than Morgan. The police searched the vehicle thoroughly, hoping to find any signs of struggle, but there was no visible blood or damage. Strangely, the car keys were missing, yet inside the vehicle, placed neatly around the gearshift, was a single red ribbon tied in a precise knot. That detail unsettled detectives. It was deliberate, too specific to be random. Someone had left it there as a message. But who and why? A deeper investigation of her apartment revealed that Morgan's laptop was gone, though her phone charger was still plugged in by her bedside. This suggested she had taken the laptop with her when she left. Her notebook, where she jotted down all her research, was open on the kitchen table, the last page scribbled with hasty notes, almost as if she had written them in a rush. The words were fragmented, but one phrase stood out. Too close. He knows. It was the first major clue that pointed toward foul play. If Morgan had been afraid of someone, had she confided in anyone, or had she kept it to herself, planning to reveal the truth only once she had undeniable proof? As the days stretched into a week with no word from her, the sense of urgency deepened. The abandoned lot where her car was found became the center of the investigation. Police dogs scoured the area, searching for any trace of Morgan's presence. Forensics dusted the vehicle for fingerprints, but only hers and a few smudged, unidentified prints were found. Then, another disturbing clue emerged. A pedestrian came forward, claiming they had seen a black SUV parked near Morgan's car on the night of her disappearance. The witness didn't see the driver, only the vehicle idling with its headlights off. The description matched a vehicle seen on security footage near Morgan's apartment earlier that night. The connection was chilling. Who had been following her, and why had they chosen that night to act? Detectives combed through Morgan Harrington's personal and professional life, searching for any possible leads that could explain her sudden disappearance and the eerie clues left behind. Her reputation as an investigative journalist made it clear that she wasn't just any victim. She had been digging into something, and someone had wanted her silenced. The discovery of her car in an abandoned lot and the cryptic red ribbon tied around the gear shift only deepened the mystery. The investigators needed to know if she had uncovered something too dangerous to expose. They started with her latest work, an investigative report on a powerful businessman named Silas Griever. He was well known for his successful enterprises, but had long been suspected of having ties to organized crime. Morgan had spent months gathering evidence on his involvement in illegal dealings, but the details of her findings remained unknown. Her laptop, which contained all of her notes and confidential research, was missing, raising the possibility that whoever took her had also taken her work to ensure nothing could be traced back to them. A deeper dive into her emails revealed something unsettling. For the past month, she had been receiving anonymous threats. Some were vague warnings telling her to stop asking questions, while others were more explicit, hinting at dire consequences if she continued. She hadn't reported them to the police, but she had mentioned them to Leora Vexley, her closest friend. Leora had urged her to take them seriously, but Morgan had brushed them off, convinced it was just an attempt to scare her away from the truth. Investigators then examined her phone records. Her last call was made to an unknown number just 20 minutes before she disappeared. The number was unregistered, making it difficult to track, but the timing was significant. Had she been meeting someone? Had she uncovered something so dangerous that it cost her life? Several witnesses near her apartment recalled seeing a black SUV circling the block on the night she vanished. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station confirmed its presence. The vehicle was spotted again near the abandoned lot where her car was later found, strengthening the theory that someone had been watching her movements. The SUV's license plate was unreadable, frustrating the investigators, but they were certain it wasn't a coincidence. Her landlord, Callum Drexler, who had claimed to be the last person to see her, was questioned again. He had been cooperative, but seemed nervous when asked about any unusual activity in the building before her disappearance. His hesitation raised suspicions, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to anything. A background check revealed a history of violent altercations, including a past restraining order filed by a former tenant, but nothing directly connected him to Morgan. Attention then turned to Morgan's ex-boyfriend, Joran Albright. Their breakup had been messy, filled with arguments and accusations. He had struggled with her growing success, often feeling overshadowed by her career. When questioned, he claimed he hadn't spoken to her in weeks, yet his phone records showed that he had been in the same neighborhood as Morgan's apartment on the night she vanished. He dismissed it as a coincidence, but investigators weren't convinced. The case took an even darker turn when Morgan's phone was finally discovered. It had been discarded in a storm drain miles away from the abandoned lot where her car was found. The phone had been wiped clean, erasing any call logs or messages that could have provided answers. However, one thing remained untouched: a draft message in her notes app. It was only a single sentence, but it sent chills through the investigators who read it. "He's watching me. I know what he did." The discovery of that message changed everything. It confirmed that Morgan had been aware of the danger surrounding her before she vanished. It also meant that she likely knew the identity of the person responsible. The problem was that the message offered no name, no direct clue as to who he was. It could have been Silas Griever, the businessman she had been investigating. It could have been Callum Drexler, her landlord with a violent past. It could have been Joran Albright, the ex-boyfriend with a possible grudge. The message also raised another terrifying question. If she had known she was being watched, why hadn't she reached out for help? Had she been planning to confront whoever was behind it? Or had she underestimated the level of danger she was in? With every piece of evidence, the case became more tangled. The suspects each had possible motives, but there was still no direct proof linking any of them to her disappearance. The police needed more than circumstantial evidence. They needed something concrete. And as they searched deeper, they realized that the person responsible for Morgan's fate had left behind more than just a missing. The investigation took a dramatic turn when a hiker stumbled upon a shallow grave deep in Blackridge Forest. The forest, known for its winding paths and overgrown clearings, was not a place many visited after dusk, yet it became the setting for a grim discovery that sent shockwaves through the community. Hidden beneath a carpet of dry leaves and tangled underbrush lay the remains of a woman. Forensic experts quickly determined that the body was that of Morgan Harrington. Her identification was confirmed by dental records and a distinctive piece of jewelry she was known to wear, a silver locket with a faded inscription. The discovery of Morgan's body forced the investigation into high gear. Forensic teams worked tirelessly at the scene. They collected samples, dusted the area for fingerprints, and carefully examined the shallow grave for any clues that could reveal what had happened in those final moments of her life. It became evident that the body had been hastily concealed. The hands of the deceased were bound with a red ribbon, the same unusual marker that had been found tied neatly around the gearshift of her car. This matching detail linked the scene in the forest directly to the earlier strange discovery, confirming that the message was not random but deliberate and calculated. Autopsy results revealed that Morgan had been strangled, and there were signs of bruising on her wrists that suggested she had been restrained before her death. The time of death was estimated to be within a few days of her disappearance. There were no defensive wounds, which led investigators to believe that Morgan might have been taken by surprise or overpowered before she had a chance to fight back. Every piece of evidence added another layer to the mystery, urging the police to delve deeper into her life and the events leading up to that fatal night. The discovery of the body also prompted a thorough review of all surveillance footage and witness accounts from the area surrounding Blackridge Forest. A local resident recalled seeing a dark figure moving hurriedly between the trees on the evening Morgan had vanished, while another nearby farmer reported unusual tire marks near the forest edge. These fragmented pieces of evidence hinted at the possibility that Morgan might have been led to the forest willingly, or perhaps her abductor had chosen this secluded spot to stage the grim scene. The conflicting theories only deepened the mystery, and investigators found themselves facing more questions than answers. Every new detail raised suspicions about those who had been close to Morgan. Her landlord, Callum Drexler, who had always appeared unassuming, suddenly came under increased scrutiny for his vague recollection of her final hours. Likewise, Silas Griever, the influential businessman who had become a target of her investigative work, found himself implicated by the mounting evidence linking him to dangerous underworld activities. And then there was Joran Albright, whose troubled past and recent proximity to the area added yet another suspect into the mix. Each of these figures was re-examined under the harsh light of forensic findings and witness statements. As the investigation pressed on, detectives revisited Morgan's personal belongings for further clues. They discovered that her notebook was left open on the kitchen table, filled with hasty scribbles and fragmented thoughts. One entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, read, "It was supposed to be safe, but I'm never alone." This small piece of evidence added an eerie note of premonition, suggesting that Morgan had sensed danger long before her disappearance. The notion that she had been aware of the impending threat, and yet felt powerless to stop it, brought an added sense of tragedy to the case. In the end, the grim scene in Blackridge Forest not only confirmed that Morgan had met a violent end, but also underscored the sinister nature of the plot that had unfolded around her. The meticulous staging of the crime scene, the deliberate use of the red ribbon, and the careful concealment of the body all pointed to a killer who was both methodical and deeply connected to the circles in which Morgan had moved. Every discovery served as a reminder that behind the seemingly ordinary life of an investigative journalist lay secrets that were as dangerous as they were dark. The discovery of Morgan Harrington's body shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a full-scale homicide inquiry. Detectives no longer had to speculate about whether she had been taken against her will. Her strangled body, bound in red ribbon and buried in a shallow grave, made it clear that someone had wanted her silenced permanently. The search for answers intensified, with investigators dissecting every detail of her life, her work, and the people she had interacted with in the days leading up to her disappearance. The autopsy had revealed no signs of prolonged captivity, suggesting that Morgan had been killed relatively soon after she vanished. This led detectives to believe that whoever had taken her had acted quickly, disposing of her body before any suspicion could arise. The lack of defensive wounds indicated that she had either been ambushed or incapacitated before she could fight back. The red ribbon, now a haunting symbol tied to both her car and her corpse, became the central focus of the case. It was not just a random object, but a deliberate signature left by the killer. Investigators widened their search for anyone who might have a connection to this peculiar detail. They cross-referenced known criminals, stalkers, and individuals involved in cases with similar patterns, but no immediate matches were found. Meanwhile, forensic analysts worked tirelessly to extract any DNA or fingerprints from the ribbon, but the fabric had been handled carefully, leaving no traceable evidence behind. The killer had been meticulous, ensuring that the only message left behind was psychological rather than physical. As detectives revisited their primary suspects, the pressure mounted on Silas Griever. Morgan's investigation into his business dealings had undoubtedly made her a threat to him, and with her sudden and violent death, he had both motive and means to orchestrate such a crime. His wealth and connections could have easily provided the resources to make someone disappear without a trace. However, when questioned, Griever displayed no signs of distress or guilt. He denied any involvement, and his alibi placed him at an out-of-town business conference on the night of Morgan's disappearance. Surveillance footage and witness testimonies confirmed this, forcing investigators to reconsider whether he had personally played a role or if someone in his circle had acted on his behalf. At the same time, attention shifted back to Joran Albright. His recent presence near Morgan's apartment and his history of volatility made him an obvious suspect. A search of his apartment revealed several news clippings about Morgan's disappearance, along with a file containing old messages between the two. While this raised suspicion, it did not serve as definitive proof of his involvement. When confronted, Joran insisted he had only been in the area because he wanted to talk to Morgan, claiming he had nothing to do with her death. However, his evasive behavior and inability to explain his actions that night kept him under scrutiny. Callum Drexler, the landlord with a troubling past, also remained on the list of potential suspects. His prior altercations with tenants and his inconsistent statements made him someone investigators couldn't ignore. Upon further digging, they discovered that he had been issued multiple warnings for harassment in the past, but none had escalated to violence. Yet, when investigators checked his financial records, they found something unusual: an unaccounted-for cash deposit made just days before Morgan vanished. The timing was suspicious, leading detectives to consider whether he had been paid to do something on someone else's behalf. Then, a chilling breakthrough emerged. A forensic analysis of Morgan's car interior revealed faint traces of a sedative, commonly used in abductions. The presence of the substance suggested that she had been drugged before being taken, further reinforcing the theory that her disappearance had been planned in advance. This revelation ruled out a crime of passion and pointed directly toward premeditation. Someone had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. With every new detail, the case became increasingly complex. The suspects all had potential, motives, yet there was still no definitive proof linking any of them to the crime. The missing laptop remained a key piece of the puzzle. If it could be recovered, It might reveal exactly what Morgan had uncovered and why someone had gone to such lengths to silence her. Then, another disturbing discovery shook the case once again. A hidden message was found in Morgan's apartment, scratched into the wooden frame of her desk. It was faint, nearly invisible unless viewed from the right angle, but its meaning was unmistakable. The message read, "Not safe, he's closer than I thought." The implications were terrifying. Morgan had known she was in danger, and she had left behind a warning, perhaps in the hope that someone. The investigation had reached a boiling point. Every lead had been followed, every suspect examined, yet the identity of Morgan Harrington's killer remained just out of reach. The discovery of the hidden message in her apartment had confirmed what detectives feared most. Morgan had known she was in danger, and the person responsible had likely been someone close to her. The question now was who. Investigators reanalyzed every detail of the case, looking for anything they might have missed. The red ribbon, the drug found in her car, the erased laptop, the shallow grave. Each element had been meticulously planned. This wasn't the work of someone who acted on impulse. It was someone who had been patient, calculating, and deliberate. Then, an unexpected breakthrough changed everything. A forensic re-examination of Morgan's personal belongings revealed a small flash drive hidden inside the lining of her handbag. It had been overlooked in the initial searches, tucked away so carefully that it seemed Morgan had known she might need to keep it from prying eyes. When detectives plugged it into a computer, they discovered a single encrypted file. It took hours to break through the security, but when they did, the contents were chilling. The file contained voice recordings, secretly captured conversations between Morgan and someone she had been investigating. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It belonged to Callum Drexler, her landlord. In the recordings, Morgan pressed Callum about his involvement in something illegal, something that connected back to Silas Griever. At first, Callum deflected, acting as if he didn't know what she was talking about. But as the conversation continued, his tone shifted. He became defensive, then aggressive. He warned her to stop asking questions, insisting she was making a mistake. Morgan, fearless as ever, refused to back down. One recording, taken just days before her disappearance, sealed his fate. In it, Callum's voice was barely above a whisper, but his words were unmistakable. "You don't know who you're messing with, Morgan. If you keep digging, you'll disappear, just like the others." It was the evidence detectives needed. Callum had known about Morgan's investigation into Griever, and he had been more involved than anyone had realized. His financial records, which had already raised suspicions, were now re-examined, revealing transactions that linked him to off-the-books payments from one of Griever's shell companies. The unaccounted-for cash deposit before Morgan's disappearance was likely payment for his silence, or worse, his involvement in getting rid of her. When confronted, Callum denied everything, but the pressure quickly mounted. Witnesses placed his car near Blackridge Forest on the night Morgan vanished. His fingerprints were found on a roll of red ribbon, matching the one used in the crime. The final blow came when his alibi collapsed. He had claimed to be out of town, yet phone records placed him near Morgan's apartment at the exact time she disappeared. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Callum finally cracked. He admitted to luring Morgan out under the pretense of discussing something important. When she arrived, he drugged her, rendering her unconscious before driving her to Blackridge Forest. There, in a fit of desperation, he strangled her and buried her body, hoping that the elements would erase any evidence of his crime. The red ribbon, he confessed, had been a message, a warning to anyone else who might try to expose the secrets she had uncovered. But there was one final twist. Callum had not acted alone. He revealed that Silas Griever had ordered the hit, fearing that Morgan's investigation would destroy his empire. Callum, desperate for money and under Griever's influence, had carried out the crime, believing it would save his own skin. But in the end, it had only sealed his fate. With Callum's confession and the evidence linking Griever to the crime, both men were arrested. Griever, despite his wealth and influence, could not escape the truth that Morgan had fought so hard to expose. Justice had finally been served. Morgan Harrington's story did not end in silence. Her work, her courage, and her determination to uncover the truth had ultimately led to the downfall of the very men who had sought to erase her. Though her life had been cut short, her voice had not been silenced. Her final act, hiding the flash drive, had ensured that the truth would come to light. As investigators closed the case, one thing remained clear. Morgan Harrington had always known the risks of seeking the truth, and in the end, it was her own determination that had ensured the truth could never be buried.